Very happy to welcome from Chick-fil-A, Russ and Rusty. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And it is a pleasure to get a chance to speak with you. I know there's a lot we can learn from the organization, and it's been put into a book. Can you talk to me about that?
Yes. So, Russ and I, this is Rusty, and Russ and I work for the Windshape Foundation, which was founded by Truett Cathy, who, of course, founded Chick-fil-A. And, this book is written to team members. It's called Teamwork, 13 Timeless Principles for Creating Success and Fulfillment as a Team Member. And it's all about how individuals can really serve their teams, and in doing so, really propel them forward and also find fulfillment.
I love this idea. We have so many books on leadership. You can't throw a rock without hitting a book on leadership and how to be a good leader. But there are many roles within a team, and we need some good followers as well, and some good just contributors. Do you touch on all the different personalities and types of people who are needed to make a strong team?
Well, in the book, we don't specifically break down the different roles, but it is absolutely meant to be written to the team member. And so I think any team member in any role will be able to identify with this book. As you said, there are so many books on leadership, and we just felt like, hey, one of the things that makes a team really, really strong, good leadership, yes, but a strong team is built by strong team members, and the leader has a particular role on that team, but they're a team member just like anybody else. And so we think that through these principles, that it'll set up any team really well, some practical ways to be strong and healthy and fulfilled.
So what principles are necessary for a good, strong team?
Probably a lot, but we focused on, we chose 13, and we broke them into two categories. We really felt like if we wanted to think about this idea of how someone can be a great team member, it really comes down to a desire to put the team before self. And so we think that kind of is captured in the principles of personal excellence. And so we devote kind of half the principles in the book to personal excellence. And then the second half is principles of sacrificial service. So they all fall into those two buckets. And that's everything from owning your role on the team, having self-awareness about how you're showing up, maintaining perspective, all the way to, sharing resources, serving others, and providing feedback, and everything in between. So we kind of hit on a variety there, but they kind of both fall into those two categories of personal excellence and sacrificial service.
And both of those, personal excellence definitely, but the idea of sacrificial service might be new in the corporate world, because it seems to me that if you're a member of a team, the point is to get recognized, to show off a little bit, and get promoted. This is taking a completely different avenue. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think we're trying to make the case that we all win or none of us do. And we actually say that phrase in the book. Yes, it is, in our society especially, it's nature for people to say, well, I'm going to look out for myself. I'm going to take care of my needs, and I'm going to try to accomplish my goals. And if somebody can help me with that, great. Or if they get in my way, I'll just run over them. And what we're actually saying here is that if we work together, if we put team before self, we actually all win. We can all accomplish our goals and be fulfilled in the process. So it's not even just about getting what you want or accomplishing what you want, but you can actually be fulfilled in the process. And so I think, to me, that might be one of the most important ideas in the entire book, is that those two things can go together.
So the
accomplishing your goals and being fulfilled in the process.
Yeah, the rising tide raises all the boats a little bit. And I don't want to get trite, but, there is no I in team, right? I mean, it really is something about the synergy of putting several people's strengths together and then letting all those strengths work together into something way more than anyone could accomplish by themselves.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly right. And there's a sense in which I think when we think about teams, sometimes we think of it as, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. If we bring 3 people together, we now have 3 times the effort. But what we see in the best teams is actually that an exponential component there, that 1 + 1 + 1 can equal 6 or 7 or 8, or however you want to lay it out. That there's a dynamic of teaming that goes beyond the simple, individual contributors working alongside each other, and goes to a place where now we're gaining things that we could never have just combining our individual skills. And so a team really is different than a group of individual contributors working in the same area.
It seems when you're on a really, really good team, you recognize it, and you also recognize what a rare experience that is. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a little bit about that in the book. Some favorite researchers of ours, some guys named Captain Back and Smith, wrote a book called The Wisdom of Teams. And in that book, they actually talk about if you're on one just really, truly high-performing team in your entire lifetime, then you should count yourself lucky.
Wow.
Because a truly high-performing team that is both successful and fulfilling, they're just rare. And when you see them, though, they're historic. We talk about a couple of those in the book. There's one team in particular that we have had the chance to study and get to know pretty well. And that's an adventure racing team from New Zealand. And they have won the World Championships multiple times. They won most recently the Echo Challenge that's been on Amazon Prime. And we actually were able to interview them. We put together a documentary about them as well, and we talk about them in the book. And they're just a great example of sustained success over time because of their willingness to sacrifice for each other, to serve each other, and to really be all about the common goal. And so Rusty had an opportunity to go and spend some time with them and interview them. Anything you want to add about that, Rusty?
Yeah, that's a great point, Rusty. That was a really compelling process. One of the things that one of the team members said that really stood out to me on that team Russ reference was, he said, the key to a great team is not just going along and thinking, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but constantly asking the question, am I doing everything I can be doing right now to ensure this team is getting a good result? And the difference in those two statements or ways of thinking is subtle, but it's also so significant, because now I'm looking up and I'm asking, am I doing all I can? Not just am I getting my task list done? And it really shows in their performance. And I think, we try to flesh that out in the book a little bit.
What does that look like? In the trenches on a day-to-day basis, what does that look like for a person to wake up in the morning and say, what can I do for my team to be everything I can be for my team?
It's the way we talk about it in the book, in that section, we kind of put three labels on it. The first is looking in, the second is looking up, and the last is stepping out. And we talk about this in the context of owning more than your role. And you're right, it does kind of start with looking in and saying, okay, do I really want to do this? Because, when you're stepping in to serve others on your team, it takes work and it's hard. So there is a moment of saying, we love the idea of team, but when it comes down to saying, I'm really going to truly take on things that might be hard for me so that we can ultimately achieve a common goal together, there is a question for oneself that says, is that important to me? So we look in, and then there's a looking up component that says, I'm able to step far enough back from my own responsibilities to keep my eyes open and say, who might need some extra help right now? What's a task out there that I could take on that was burdening somebody else? And then the stepping out piece is I actually have to do it. When we watch the adventure racing team, a great example of that would be the way they work with gear. So in that sport, you have to be within 100 feet of each other all the time, and you have to cross the finish line together. There's no individual component. And sometimes these races are 4, 5, 6 days racing all day, all night. And we would film and watch them, and you would see them coming over significant challenges. And one team member was carrying 2 backpacks. And they would share with you that, we're a team. So if this person's struggling, I'm going to carry their backpack as well as mine until they come right, knowing that once they come right later on, they're going to do the same for me. Wow. And so one of the team members shared, he said, it doesn't do any good for me to turn around to someone who's going slow and say, hey, go faster. I have to help them go faster, because as Russ said, we all win or none of us do. And so in our trenches, in our workplace, I think we can apply that same thing. What backpack can I carry? And am I willing to do it, knowing that someone else will do the same for me down the road?
How is that different than enabling somebody to just dump their work on you?
It's a fine line, actually, a lot of the time. But a lot of that goes back to the established relationships that you have. So this book is entitled Teamwork, because it's work to be a team. And so I think you're constantly working on relationships. One of the other chapters we talk about is giving feedback. and we actually entitled it "Feedback is a Gift." And we tend to think of feedback as a negative thing, yet nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I really hope I underperformed today. I've yet to meet anyone that would say that's how they view the start of their day. But yet we often do underperform. We make mistakes, we get off track, we drift. And so we need people in our life to speak that back into us. So I think if that's going on all the time, we're encouraging people when there's positive movement. We're being constructive when that's needed. If that's going on all the time, well, then you never get to that place of enabling when somebody's really struggling, like they're really struggling and they're still giving all they've got. And that's when, man, there's no question to reach out, grab their bag, and say, let's go because we've got to do this together.
How different is that in the corporate world? I'm thinking that there would be some environments where this would be easier to adapt, like in a church organization, a nonprofit organization, where you've got a lot of empathetic people that are really trying to help everyone be all they can be. In a corporate world, when you're trying to be all you can be and get ahead, this is kind of a revolutionary idea, but it seems like it could be transformative. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking, probably in any environment, whether it's the corporate world or a church or a small business, you have different types of people in any environment. I think that you're right that in any place where there's already an inclination of folks to value service and to value caring for others, then that certainly makes the application of these principles easier because you already have a bit of a like-minded approach. And I think that the hurdle there is to say, hey, just because I value that doesn't mean it's easy. And so there's still the hard work of going in every day and applying these things. But to your point, if you're in an environment where sacrifice and service are not highly valued and where a very individualistic culture, then it is a more difficult place to begin. I think that some of it really comes down to the idea that it's got to start somewhere. Somebody's got to go first. And I think that selfish behavior can be contagious, but I think that servant behavior can be contagious too.
Wow.
And I think sometimes, some people will take advantage. That's the reality. We use the phrase sometimes perilous pitfalls. So, definitely there's the reality that somebody's going to take advantage of that. But I think I would guess that we're probably more inclined to assume that our service will be taken advantage of than maybe we should be. And I think if we can take that first step and serve others, we might be surprised to find that the response people have might be one where they're more willing to serve us back as well. And especially when people start to see the fruits of that and what that can mean. Russ shared the fulfilling aspect of that. And, there's a movie, Remember the Titans. I don't know if you've seen that, but there's that classic scene in that movie where Julius Campbell and Gary Bertier in the film are speaking, and one of them says, I tell you what, I don't see a team here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on me and I'm going to get mine. I'm going to take care of me. And then, Gary Bertier says, man, that's the worst attitude I've ever heard. And Julius says, attitude reflects leadership, Captain. And so there's this kind of evolution that comes after that where there's a focus on me and mine that turns into us and ours. Yeah. And the team, obviously, it's a movie, but the team succeeds and it's based on real life. And I think that can happen more often than we may give credit for.
Russ Surratt and Rusty Chadwick, who are the authors of Teamwork. And you have gotten to see, I'm sure, this in action. I know Truett Cathy, who is founder of your organization, has a very successful business called Chick-fil-A, that you kind of see this in action, don't you? There's just something different about the culture there. And you know it as soon as you drive up and someone says, how may I serve you? Instead of even, can I help you? And instead of sure or whatever, they say, my pleasure. Those little things make such a difference, don't they?
They absolutely do. And, I think this book is actually kind of a collective outpouring of the experiences that we have had and learned from during our organization, the foundation's experience and our connection to the Cathy family and Chick-fil-A. So, yeah, I think a lot of these things you would very readily see and say, yeah, I could see that happening if you were to experience, either one of our organizations. So it really is an outflowing of what we've been doing for years, or at least attempting to do.
You also had to do a little bit of teamwork in writing this book. Talk to me about that.
Susie, writing this book was a wonderful process. Russ and I have worked together for a long time, and Russ is my direct supervisor and my friend, and so the process of writing the book together actually was a joy. I think we could say. I mean, it was hard work, but the relational dynamic of that was easy. We divided the work up, and then we would take parts of it ourselves, and we would share that with each other. And sometimes I would hand Russ a chapter and say, "Hey, I got as much as I can get here. I need you to carry this over the finish line, or whatever we might do." And so it really was a process of give and take there. But it really, honestly, I would have much preferred to do this with Russ than do it by myself. If I was writing this on my own, it would have been a much more difficult task. So I think that it kind of was a good affirmation of the fact that there really is a lot of value outside of just individual contributors, but the team approach.
Does your collaborator agree?
I'm sorry, Susie. I was going to say, I think even for the process as a whole of writing the book, there's even more people than just the two of us. I mean, there's a lot of people on our team. There's some other, partners that we have worked with and kind of getting this to the point where it's ready to be released. And so it is a great example of, Rusty and I may have our names on the book and be kind of the face of it, but it's a great example of how many people have, gone into being able to put together a project like this.
Were there parts of it that surprised you? Something that you discovered, some aha moment as you're writing about something that you learned something even fresh and new from that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Susie. I think that a couple of things that come to mind. One is there was a reminder along the way that it's much easier to say than to do. And I think as we wrote it, we were constantly reminded with the fact that it's simple, but it's not easy. And actually our leadership team at work is going through the book now before it comes out. So we've been going through it, and as we tackle it, I'm reading chapters that I wrote and I'm saying, oh, I need to go back and do that. So I think one of the things that surprises you is just because encouraging somebody is a good thing to do doesn't mean you're doing it regularly. Just because we should be humble when we receive feedback doesn't mean we don't get defensive when somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to share some thoughts about your performance. It's not as easy to do as to say, but just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth it. It's the fact that it's hard that's the reason that everyone doesn't do it, but the ones who do reap the reward. And I think that was maybe, whether it was surprising or at least it was definitely affirmed in the journey for me. Russ, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would completely agree. It was so much of a reminder of how practical what's in the book. Like as we were writing, and even as I go back and read through, the revision process, I mean, just so many pictures and stories come to mind of when we actually experienced this or when we made a mistake in this particular area and how we had to learn from it. So just the practicality of the content in the book and how it just works if you do it. And so it's Rusty's point. It's not enough just to know it. I mean, we'd really like for this book to be kind of a field manual as much as anything. It's not one of those books we hope that you put on the read and then you stick on the shelf like, hey, I read that. But it's meant to be, I go back to it and, man, I'm about to sit down and share some feedback with somebody. Let me go back through that chapter and read some of those points and get some of those, examples of what I can try, because it is so practical. And that was just reinforced to me over and over again. Same kind of way that Rusty said, like, I was reminding myself, hey, I haven't done a lot of that lately. I need to work on that.
Just listening to you, it seems like this would be something good in any group setting. And I'm thinking, of course, in the workplace. But what about, can you put some of these principles to work in a family?
Absolutely. I think, the core fundamental component of any team is just relationships. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. So these principles are almost just principles of relationships. Anytime you have more than one person involved, so whether that's a marriage, that's a team. Marriage is a team. A family is a team. Russ and I were actually talking recently about, the different parts of the book that may be most helpful there, whether it's engaging in healthy conflict. I think there's certainly something there for marriages, of course, and for families. That's a big component there.
Yes.
Things like maintaining perspective when life gets feels out of control. Owning your role and doing the things you're supposed to do, but also owning more than your role. I think there's probably as many applications for the family and a marriage as there is for a work team, and because you're just applying the principles to different situations. Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
We've talked a lot about the sacrificial service part. Haven't really delved much into the personal excellence part. Where do we start there to be all we can be?
I think the start there is the owning your own role. And, Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, talks about this idea of going the second mile. And so a lot of, when you hear about servant leadership or being in a team, a lot of people will talk about that idea, going the second mile, going beyond what's required. But not a lot of people talk about you can't go the second mile unless you go the first mile first. Mm. The first mile is required. Mm. And so our point would be we've got to do what's required, what's expected. We've got to hold up our end of the bargain on being a team, being in a family, being in a marriage. And then let's also look beyond that to say, how can I sacrifice and serve my team?
There's a lot of humility involved in that, isn't there? To be able to look back and do some personal assessment before you achieve personal excellence.
And we actually try to give a lot of, I guess you could say, reflection questions in each chapter to kind of say, am I doing this? How could I apply it? How am I applying? Because you're right. One of the big things that we talk about is perspective and self-awareness and kind of knowing where you're at relative to the situation you're in. So you can't apply one of these principles as a tool if you're not really aware of where you're at in the moment.
Yeah. Seems to me we spend a lot of time trying to strengthen our weaknesses when, let me just see what you think about this. Why not pull together a team where some people are just better at some things than other people and let everybody play to their strengths? What do you think about that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's been some great research on that. And I think that if there's I think a good school of thought that says, we're probably not going to turn most of our weaknesses into strengths, but we can certainly take our natural talents and bring them to bear and turn them into great strengths. And that's a wonderful place to focus. And so I think that when we pull that together, that's really helpful. I think a big component of that is knowing those things, understanding and being willing to admit that. There's a great tool that was developed a long time ago called the Johari window, mm-hmm. or Johari window. It talks about these different kind of like areas of our lives where we have the known things, we have blind spots that others see in us, but that we don't see. We have the things that we know, but we don't show other people, and the things that nobody knows. And I think there is an element of personal excellence that really involves an authentic and humble self-awareness study. It says, who am I? Because then I know what things to claim and what things not to, and I know what to tell the team about where I can put my strengths to use best. And sometimes I think we claim the things that we want to do, but interest doesn't always equal aptitude. And so I think when we can be honest about where we're best, then certainly that brings the team together in a way that we're not going to when it's just trying to improve weaknesses.
And I'm guessing that part of this entails creating a very safe space to allow people to really acknowledge this is an area I need help in, and be able to bolster those things that I can see that someone can't see, or that someone else sees in me that I'm not even seeing, those blind spots. You need to know that it's going to be okay to explore that, and you're not going to get eaten alive. Yes?
Yes, and we actually have a chapter about the idea of promoting safety on your team and all that brings with it. And to your point, you can't have a successful and healthy, fulfilling team without having a safe place to make mistakes, to be creative, to learn and grow. Growing by its very nature is a stretching thing. If you stay in your comfort zone, you don't grow. But you still have to be in a safe place to be able to be stretched. And so we talk about, being safe to fail, and how the opposite of safety is fear. And so if there's a ton of fear, then there's not going to be a lot of safety, but there's also not going to be a lot of creativity or innovation. So in promoting safety, somebody's got to go first.
That is so good.
And so we would say as a team member, rather than waiting on the leader or waiting on somebody else, what can you specifically do from your seat on the team to begin promoting safety? How can you be a safe place for one other person? Maybe that's how it starts.
Mm-hmm. Well, by not putting targets on everybody's back would be a good place to start. We hear the term team player all the time. What's a good team player?
Well, when you say that, I think that sometimes that term can be applied, can be misapplied, where someone says, "Hey, just be a team player."
Yeah.
And what that means is, take out a whole bunch of extra stuff and just do this, and it's no big deal. So I think we have to be careful with it. But I think a good team player is someone who says, "I am willing to show up every day and own my role, to be prepared to do the things that have been asked to do and called to do. And I'm also wanting to go beyond that and say, how can I do everything I can to help ensure this team gets a good result?" I really think that's what it's about. It's saying I want to own what I've been given, and I want to look for those things I haven't been given that would contribute to our health. And I think combining those two things is at least a good start.
The book's Teamwork by Russ Surratt and Rusty Chadwick. How do we get it, guys?
Well, we actually have a separate website set up for the book. It's teamworkbook.co, and you can go to that site. You can get the first chapter for free on that site, and it also has links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, where you can actually purchase the book, and it'll be available in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook.
Well, just from hearing you, this belongs in every home and in every office. It's Teamwork by Russ Surratt and Rusty Chadwick. And guys, thank you so much for bringing this to our community today.
Thank you, Susan. We certainly appreciate you.